All right, everybody, welcome back. We are diving into a question today that I think is on a lot of people's minds these days, and it's a big one.
Yeah.
Will AI steal my job?
Hmm.
It's a little ominous sounding, maybe even a little dramatic, but with ChatGPT
Right.
constantly in the headlines these days, I think it's something that a lot of us are thinking about.
It's definitely got people talking. I mean, from, the barista at your local coffee shop to, a hotshot Wall Street banker.
Yeah.
It really does feel like this new wave of AI, particularly these large language models, these LLMs, they're not just automating those simple tasks anymore. They're really starting to demonstrate this potential to impact fields that, we used to think were uniquely human.
Absolutely. And to help us break it all down, to really unpack this whole LLM revolution, we've got a ton of fascinating research papers. We're even looking at some early findings from a paper that actually uses GPT-4 to analyze jobs.
Wow.
Plus, because we always love to get a pulse on what real people are thinking, we're going to be checking in on some Reddit discussions.
Of course.
Always a lively place.
The anxieties, the hopes about AI and work are on full display there.
Totally, totally. And it's great to get that range because
Yeah.
it's not all doom and gloom.
We're definitely not all doom and gloom, and I think that's why it's so important that we have a diverse set of sources for this deep dive. It's not about fear-mongering. It's about arming you guys, our listeners, with the knowledge that you need to understand this shift.
I love that. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of which jobs might be most impacted, let's start with the basics. What are LLMs and how are they different from the AI that we've seen in the past?
So in the simplest terms, I like to think of an LLM as kind of like this language wizard. It's been trained on this massive amount of text data, and it uses that knowledge to understand, generate, and even manipulate human language in ways that we really haven't seen before.
Okay.
ChatGPT, I think, is like the prime example here.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It can write you stories, poems, it can translate languages, it can answer those really complex questions, it can even code.
It's basically like having a super-powered research assistant at your fingertips, but one that can also write you like a sonnet if you needed to.
Exactly.
But how do we go from, poems and code snippets to this idea that LLMs could potentially be taking over jobs?
Yeah, that's the leap, right.
Yeah.
So one of the research papers that we're diving into actually analyzes thousands of different tasks, but across all different kinds of occupations. And they use this database called WONET.
Okay, on net, yeah.
Yeah, and this database, think of it as like a really, really detailed encyclopedia of jobs.
Okay.
All the skills that they require. So it's super comprehensive.
So they've got this job encyclopedia. How do the LLMs fit into all of this?
Right. So they developed this new metric. They call it exposure.
Exposure, okay.
And it's basically a way to try to measure the potential impact of LLMs on specific job tasks.
Okay.
And through their research and analysis, they've actually identified 3 levels of exposure.
3.
Yeah, we've got E0, E1, and E2.
Exposure levels. It's already giving me anxiety just thinking about it. E0, E1, E2. Break it down for us. What does it all mean?
Okay, so exposure levels, E0, E1, E2. It's not as intimidating as it sounds.
Okay, good.
So E0, that's our lowest level of exposure.
Okay.
And it basically means that LLMs, they're not really expected to significantly change how those tasks are performed. Think about jobs that require a lot of physical dexterity, really hands-on stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of creativity or on-the-spot problem solving.
Makes sense.
So, a surgeon or a chef, those roles are not going to be replaced by a chatbot anytime soon.
Okay, that does make me feel a little bit better. So what about E1 and E2? Where do things start to get a little dicey?
Yeah, so E1 is kind of where we start to see the potential for these LLMs to really have a significant impact on how we work.
Okay.
These are tasks where, tools like ChatGPT can already drastically reduce the amount of time that a human would need to spend on them. Things like writing reports, summarizing large amounts of data, even coding.
Oh, wow.
Tasks that involve a lot of information processing.
Interesting. Okay. So if I, spend the majority of my day, writing emails and analyzing spreadsheets and, navigating all the red tape of, bureaucracy, should I be worried?
Well, I wouldn't say worried, but I do think it's a good wake-up call to start thinking about, okay, how might my skills need to evolve?
Yeah.
And that's actually where E2 comes in.
Yeah.
So these are the tasks where LLMs, by themselves, they can't fully automate the job, but they could definitely be used as the foundation for new software or tools that lead to, pretty significant automation down the line.
So even if my job isn't going to be replaced by, a robot overlord tomorrow, It might look radically different in a few years. That's a bit of a mind warp.
Absolutely. And that's precisely why it's so important to really understand these distinctions, right? It allows us to start preparing now. What are the skills that are going to be most valuable in this LLM-driven world that we're moving into?
Yeah, that future proofing. Okay, so we've got our exposure levels, but
Right.
what did the research actually find? Were there any surprises in terms of like which jobs might be most impacted by all of this?
There were definitely some surprises. One of the, I think, more unexpected findings was that on average, higher paying jobs might actually be more exposed to this LLM impact than lower paying jobs.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
That kind of flips the script on this whole like robots are coming for blue collar jobs narrative. It sounds like these LLMs aren't just coming for those like repetitive manual tasks anymore.
Exactly. They're capable of handling these more complex, nuanced tasks that, we used to think were the exclusive domain of these like highly educated professionals.
Fascinating.
To really illustrate this point, let's look at a specific example from the research. They compared a financial examiner, so a job with high LLM exposure,
Right?
to a mathematician, a job with a much lower exposure score.
Okay, so both of those, I mean, on the surface, those both sound like jobs that require like a high level of education and expertise.
Yeah.
So what gives? What makes the financial examiner, more vulnerable, so to speak? So both jobs, they've got numbers, you're really using your brain. What's the difference? Why is one more exposed to this whole LLM revolution than the other?
Yeah, it really comes down to the nature of the task. So financial examiners, they're often working with these huge volumes of data, legal documents, financial regulations.
Right.
They might be reviewing loan applications, analyzing financial statements, looking for any potential fraud or making sure that companies are complying with all the rules.
Yeah.
And these are all tasks that LLMs, with their ability to, process and analyze information so quickly, they could potentially take over or at least significantly change how they're done.
Okay, that makes sense. But a mathematician also works with complex data. They've got to stay on top of all the latest research and theories. So what makes their work less susceptible to these LLMs?
Yeah, you're right. Mathematicians, they're dealing with complex information, but their work often involves this much higher degree of abstract reasoning, creativity,
Right.
problem solving. They might be developing entirely new mathematical models or exploring these theoretical concepts or even, finding elegant solutions to these incredibly complex problems. And
Right.
those are skills that are, at least for now, still beyond the reach of current LLMs.
So it's not just about working with data or even having all this like really advanced knowledge in a particular field. It's about the kind of thinking, the creativity, the human element that these LLMs, I mean, at least for now, can't replicate.
Exactly. And that's a key takeaway for anyone who's listening, who's wondering, okay, how do I navigate this? This is a little scary. This is a big change. It's not about trying to outcode the machines
Yeah.
or becoming a walking encyclopedia. It's about focusing on those skills that really make us uniquely human.
So future-proofing ourselves. If we're thinking about the future, what are those future-proof skills that we should be kind of like honing and focusing on?
Well, based on this research and just kind of what we're seeing in different industries, skills like critical thinking, complex problem solving, adaptability, creativity, these are all going to be more valuable than ever.
So it's not just about what you know, it's about how you think and how you learn.
Precisely. And that kind of brings us back to that research paper excerpt that you found so interesting, the one that was dedicated to Ilya Sutskever.
Oh, right. Yeah, that was kind of a head scratcher for me. Like, it's great that they dedicated their work to him, but it didn't really explain why.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the point. I mean, Ilya Sutskever, he's obviously one of the leading minds in AI. He's a co-founder of OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT.
Right.
And his work has really been instrumental in the development of these LLMs that we've been discussing.
So a big deal. But how does that tie into the dedication or the lack thereof?
I think it's a subtle reminder that even with all this talk about AI and automation, it's still humans who are driving these innovations. These LLMs, they're tools. They're powerful tools, but they're the product of human ingenuity, creativity,
Right.
and yeah, even a bit of artistry.
That's such a good point. It's not about us versus them. It's about understanding the potential of these tools and how we can use them in a way that benefits, humanity.
Exactly. And that requires us to be informed, to be asking these critical questions, to be active participants in shaping the future of work, the future of technology.
I love that. It's a call to action for all of us. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the message is pretty clear. Stay curious, stay adaptable, And don't be afraid to embrace the unknown.
Well said. Always more to learn, to question, and to explore.
And that is what the deep dive is all about. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of knowledge.